In this episode, Sawad Hussain spoke about bringing Arabic literature into English, developmental editing, her passion for mentoring, and her new book, Djinn. Sawad Hussain is a translator from Arabic whose work in 2023 was shortlisted for the Warwick Prize for Women in Translation and the Saif Ghobash Banipal Prize for Arabic Literary Translation and longlisted for the Moore Prize for Human Rights Writing. She has run translation workshops under the auspices of Shadow Heroes, Africa Writes, the Yiddish Book Center, the British Library, and the National Center for Writing. Her most recent translations include Edo Souls by Stella Gaitano and Djinn by Djamila Morani. Her works in progress include Women of the Rivers by Ishraga Mustafa and Behind the Sun by Bushra Al-Maqtari. You can read more about her on her website sawadhussain.com. There is a link provided in the show notes to buy her translated work. So, welcome to our podcast, Sawad.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here today. I'm a big fan of the Harshaniam.
Thank you very much. Now, you started as a translator in French to English. Tell us about your journey into Arabic literature and Arabic translations.
So yes, actually a lot of people don't know, Anil, that I started out as a French translator, unless they have, read the essay in Violent Phenomena or are maybe one of my mentees who work from French. I did my undergraduate degree in French and Arabic and then proceeded to do a master's degree in Arabic literature. And when I started translating it was 2008, I was primarily doing French texts. So I was working on samples of French novels from the Francophone world. So like Mauritius, maybe Algeria, a few of the other islands, things that were not from France itself, but just countries where France was spoken, because that was more so what I identified with. But unfortunately, I had applied for a few workshops and, was trying to make connections, and was finding it incredibly difficult to gain any sort of footing. And I was at that time also living in Johannesburg, South Africa, and it was quite removed, and I'm not sure how it is today now in terms of, how connected it is to the literary translation sort of ecosystem, but I definitely think it's probably in a better place than it was, back then for being a translator from French and Arabic in particular. So with French, I wasn't finding a way in. I was doing some commercial work, but not literary translation, and actually had someone advise me, which at the time I was very upset about, which I write about in my essay, advised me to focus only on Arabic translation because they said the French market is too saturated and I won't really get far. But, they also just kind of said you would be better suited to translate from Arabic and also left it at that. So, interpret that as you may. And so then I did. I focused on Arabic translation whilst also, I was a full-time teacher at the time of languages and, got my first contract after 7 years.
7 years.
7 years, yeah. So that's after like intensive. I was covering a lot of cultural sort of festivals, doing a lot of free samples, which I don't recommend people to do now. But when I tell my mentees, sometimes they get discouraged if they get a few rejections. But on average, like by God's grace, most of them are getting publishing contracts within 2 years, I would say, of having started the career. And then I, remind them it took me 7 years to get my first contract. And then after that, it took another, I think, 2 or 3 years before I got another book. And then the floodgates just like opened for me.
So when was this? When did your first book got published?
So if I started in 2008, 7 years is about 2015. Yeah. It was a Jordanian science fiction novel called Jannah Ala al-Ard by Fadi Zaghmout, which is Heaven on Earth. And it was published by indie press in Hong Kong called Signal 8 Press.
Within those 7 years or 8 years, how many samples you produced? Different samples.
Countless. I was doing things for, I was just trying to pitch books to publishers. But at that time, I mean, publishing was even more closed than it is now, right? And another, we'll probably get into this later, why I'm so passionate about mentoring. But so at that time, yeah, I was pitching works to publishers. I was trying to place excerpts with online magazines. I was attending literary festivals when I could, in the Emirates, for example, and having interviews with authors and then translating those for free into English and pitching those to different online outlets, doing book reviews of works which were written in Arabic and works which had been translated from Arabic. So trying to really, and this is something I always encourage my mentees to do, is really make yourself into someone who has their finger on the pulse of what is happening in your language pair. So, I because of those 7 years, I was very well grounded in, I'm a specialist in contemporary Arabic literature. Classical is something I'm not familiar with and would not feel comfortable even translating. And there are specialists for that. However, for contemporary Arabic literature, especially if we're talking about women's works, like, I'm your person. So, yeah, and so I think that's why finally when I did get my first publishing contract, and then publishers had seen, because a lot of the times I would pitch books and they would say, at the time there was this house called Bloomsbury Qatar Foundation, which has now shuttered since. But I pitched 3 books to them, which they ended up acquiring, and they liked my sample. And I did a book report, but in the end, the book would always go to somebody else because I was deemed inexperienced. I didn't have a book under my belt, so they liked my taste in literature, but just didn't think I could be trusted with the book.
You said book report. What exactly is book report?
Yes, yeah. So a book report, sometimes called a reader's report, is basically an analysis of the book, its triumphs and tragedies, and you can have a summary in about 500 words, but you're also talking about the strong points and the weak points of the book, who would be the possible market for this book, and why you think it would sell. It's kind of just giving an overview for the editor. And a lot of the times, editors would commission you to do a report if the book has come to them via an agent or the publisher itself. But for Arabic, we don't have many agents. So a lot of the times, translators are the ones, which I'm sure, you heard with your interviews with other, translators working from languages which aren't so supported in terms of financial infrastructure, such as Swedish and Korean. But if you're working from Telugu or Arabic or, Thai, you as the translator need to bring the book to the publisher. And so a lot of the time, you have to do something. There's a lot of unpaid labor involved in it, which is why over the years I've tried to work out ways to avoid this unpaid labor sort of black hole. Yeah.
This unpaid labor. 8-9 months ago, I heard a talk by Jessica Cohen on YouTube. That's a wonderful talk she gave. Tell us about this unpaid labor, other than producing translations and book samples. What and all is involved in a literary translator today, coming from a language like Arabic, let us say?
Yeah. So aside, there are people actually called book scouts who get paid to read books and choose titles that would be suitable for certain publishers. As a translator, I'm doing that. That's unpaid, right? Then when I find the book that I like, I have to write a general summary of it, give information, as we discussed about the book. Usually I will do that part for free because I need to give the editor something to work with, but I've stopped doing sample translations for free. Originally, I would do a sample translation of 2,000 to 3,000 words for free and then send that as a pitch pack. But now my workaround, and this is like, a sort of, again, it's not a secret, it's something I share with many translators working in different pairs, is that I will find an online outlet who will pay me for the excerpt. So I kind of pitch them the idea of the excerpt. I say, okay, in this part of the novel, this is happening. Does that sound like something you would be interested in? And either they'll say yes or no. And if they say yes, they'll commission me to do a sample of about 2,000 words. And then I'll translate that. It goes up on their website, and then I will include that in my pitch pack. But other unpaid labor that happens when you're a translator from a language which is not well supported is all the communication between the editor and the author. So I have to be a sort of interpreter and middle woman for that, right? So if there are queries on the manuscript from the editor, I have to translate those into Arabic and then translate the author's responses back from Arabic into English. Now, it sounds pretty straightforward, but when we were working on Black Foam, for example, with Amazon Crossing, Marsha Linksquilly and I and our author, Haji Jabir, he can speak English, he can understand English, but when you're talking about literature, obviously you want to be speaking in a language that you feel most comfortable with, especially if it's your own artistic work. So he chose to speak in Arabic, totally fine. And so, but that took the queries, it took about 2.5 days of just constant messaging and translating. And then I have to transcribe the response onto the manuscript into English. So this is all like WhatsApp messages, right? And you can do it over a Zoom call, etc. But because I'm in different time zones compared to all of my authors, I find that WhatsApp is the most sort of conducive means of communication. But then also, so after the book is published, then all the publicity. So this is something that happens to translators, even if you are working from a bigger language pair like French, German, Spanish. A lot of the publicity will fall on you as a translator. So contacting bookstagrammers, contacting YouTubers you're just smiling here. Yeah. I'm like a publicist in my own right, to the point where I have sometimes other translators asking me, oh, can I like book a session with you? I'll pay you. Can you give me some tips on how to publicize my book? Right. So that's sort of like a side thing now that I'm, have just started. But it's a lot, like as a translator, people don't, I think, always recognize it's more than just translating words on the page. It's a whole sort of bag of tricks you have to have at your disposal. But the good thing is the translator community is very generous, and you will always find someone who can support you, with whatever you're trying to do. It's very rarely now that I would be invited in person to speak about a book that I've translated. I've been invited to a number of literary festivals, to talk about my translations, but not to, let's say I was invited to I went to Newcastle, I think about 10 days ago. That was just to talk about literary translation in general, though. I don't really get invited for the book tour or anything. But what's happening right now, actually, today is the publication day for the Djinn's Apple.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very exciting. But the reason I bring this up is because they're doing a blog book tour, right? Which I've only ever experienced once before with Black Foam, which was with Amazon Crossing. But the blog book tour, the way it works is they've sent all these advanced review copies to different bloggers. And for a series of it's going to be about 15 to maybe 18 days. Each day a different blogger is releasing a review on the book.
Nice.
Yeah, it's great. And they're varying in length. Some of them are like maybe 100 words, but I read a really nice one today, which was more lengthy and more sort of, in depth and something that I really appreciated that they took the time to write such a review. So, yeah, but I mean, to organize that's now because Neem Tree Press has a publicity person, right? So even though they're a smaller house, they have decided to invest in that. But a lot of houses I've worked with don't do any publicity.
So as far as the translation ecosystem is concerned for Arabic to English, from 2008 to 24, 15, 16 years, right? A decade and a half. What are the changes that you have witnessed?
So many great changes, and also a lot of things which have remained exactly the same. So the, things which have been very encouraging and just motivational are the fact that, for example, we have more translators now working from Arabic into English.
So how many are there right now? Active translators?
Active, I would say, who at least have 1 to 2 publications under their belt, if we're also considering children's literature, which is a sort of booming area for Arabic into English translation. I would say at least 30, 35. Yeah, we have a Google literary translators sort of group. And, we're trying to be a bit more organized with us as a community. But what's wonderful is that it's not only diversified in terms of ethnicity, but also, sort of socioeconomic background, where people are coming from, people's interests, people are specializing in specific types of literature. One of my mentees is just really focused on young adult titles and graphic novels, right? Whereas another one is more interested in women's autobiographies, right? So that doesn't mean that they won't do other books, but in terms of what they really love and want to try to focus on are those sort of genres, which I think is very exciting, because when I first started out, I was just trying to do anything. I was just, trying to get work. And I think also what's changed is now there are more publishers interested in Arabic to English literary translation. I think having seen the success of a few choice novels, such as we had Frankenstein in Baghdad by Ahmed Dawi, who is an Iraqi author. It was translated by Jonathan Wright. It made the Man Booker International Prize. I think it was the shortlist. And so that was, very exciting for Arabic literature. Then you had the Booker winner, Marilyn Booth with Celestial Bodies and Jocha Al-Harti. Like, I cried when they won because it was such a seminal moment for Arabic literature. I remember I was sitting just here at my kitchen table, just bawling, because I feel Arabic literature so much of the time is overlooked, underappreciated, stigmatized, undervalued, and so I just, and more so I have editors coming to me now asking like, oh, do you have any titles to recommend and things like that. But things that have not changed, unfortunately, or where the needle has only shifted ever so slightly, is funding. And we don't have a robust agenting infrastructure.
Any organizations which are working specifically for Arabic translations?
So here in the UK, the only sort of funding you can receive as an Arabic to English literary translator is, for example, the Sharjah Translation Initiative. They do a grant, but the only issue with that is, as a publisher, so the translator cannot apply for it. Yeah, so the publisher has to go to the Sharjah Book Fair, but a lot of publishers I've worked with have said no, because there's they don't see it worth their time to go all the way to Sharjah for this one title, right? If they were doing a series, maybe, because it is a healthy sort of fund, but so no one I know has really taken advantage of that. Just to give you an idea, so I've published about maybe 14, 15 books. I have 17 books under contract. I think 5 of those which are published in the UK, have been supported by an English Pen grant. So English Pen has been instrumental in my career, really, to allow UK publishers to encourage them to publish Arabic literature in translation. So I really have to thank them, but it also is a precarious sort of, way of existence to depend on this one funding body. So in terms of what can be, what needs to change is really having more funding for we don't have anything like, French has this thing called French Voices, where you can apply with a manuscript which hasn't even been published. But actually, having said that, I am on the board of trustees of this prize that has come out of Oman called Beit al-Ghasham Dar Arab Translation Prize. So we were just talking about this earlier, but I've just come back from the book fair in Muscat, where they announced the inaugural winner. And it's a prize where you can submit a manuscript as an Arabic to English translator of a book that has been, has to be a book that has already been published in Arabic, right? But not translated into English yet. And if you are shortlisted, you receive prize money. But if you win, then the book will be published with Dar Arab, which is a UK-based house here. And you're paid to translate the entire book. And then also you receive prize money of £2,000. So it's a really exciting initiative for me, particularly because it kind of it blows open all the closed doors, the sort of very gated community, which is, publishing. So you don't have to, you could be a translator who has never translated before. You don't have to have any connections. You just have to have a great project and be able to ensure that the rights are available. So that was really, that's a really encouraging initiative, but I think it needs to gain some more traction and publicity. But you can apply from anywhere in the world, and actually the next round of applications opens on March 1st. So that's very soon. So if there are any translators, translating from Arabic, or aspiring translators from Arabic anywhere in the world, you could apply to this prize.
You've been very active in mentoring people, translators, and active in translation workshops.
I'm very passionate about mentoring because I never had a mentor. I found it extremely difficult to break into literary translation. And I would say the closest thing I had to a mentor was my friend, Marsha Links-Quayle, the founder of the Arab Lit blog, right? She was someone who was just continually being like, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? But I never had someone who was, she wasn't practicing literary translation at the time. So I never really had one. And so as a result, I'm very, very passionate about mentoring translators who are working from Arabic to English, or, who find themselves perhaps on the outside of the publishing sphere geographically or otherwise for whatever reason. Yeah. And so I mentor, I think currently, I mentor officially through usually the National Center for Writing. I've been doing, they have these annual mentorships for a number of different languages. And I've been doing their Arabic one, I think, for maybe about 3 years now. I think this is the third or fourth round. But I informally mentor about, I think, up to 12 translators working from different languages. But it doesn't mean that I'm always very quick to get back to them. I just have them all on WhatsApp. But we generally try to check in once every 2 months. And initially, I was only focusing on Arabic to English, but now I've branched out to translators working from Kiswahili or other languages through different workshops I've been running, where I think I've identified where it's someone who's extremely talented but just needs that sort of support to get their foot in the door. So much about publishing, unfortunately, we keep coming back to this, is about connections. And it's taken me many, many years to make those connections and to build those relationships. And a lot of times editors are quite, understandably so, but they're quite sort of conservative in who they will work with. And they would only consider working with someone new if it is, ushered in by somebody they know. So, yeah. But, so that's kind of what, why I do mentoring.
And about Shadow Heroes. Tell us about Shadow Heroes.
Shadow Heroes was co-founded by my dear friend Gitanjali Patel and her co-founder Sophie Lewis, who translates from French. It really has taken off, and what it is introducing translation as a life skill to young adults, teenagers, in their schools through through the medium of translation workshops. So one that I co-ran with a friend of mine, Nariman Youssef, who is currently the British Center for Literary Translation resident. So we co-ran a workshop on translating graphic novels and comics, Arabic comics in particular. Actually, and we were focusing on Dina Muhammad's work, who is an Egyptian graphic novelist who had an online series about a female superhero at the time, countering like patriarchy in Cairo and the like. And she just won the Warwick Prize for Women in Translation this year for her graphic novel, which is called Shubbaik Lubbaik. And it's basically means like, your wish is my command. Okay, so it was published by Granta. It's a highly successful graphic novel, and it's just really exciting to see the trajectory of Dina. But as an aside, so we co-led that comics workshop, and it really is just letting young people know that whether they have a home language, which sometimes is undervalued, for me, for example, growing up speaking Urdu and English at home, Urdu was never really valued in a professional capacity for me until I started working for a place here in Cambridge. And so I guess what I would say is just kind of showing people that whatever your home language, there is high value to it. I think that's something that I was lacking growing up. It was very much emphasis on French, and the European languages are the ones of prestige, when in fact our languages are just as much valuable and of note.
You wrote an article about developmental editing, right? What exactly is that?
Right. So developmental editing is a sort of phenomenon that I have seen in my past 4 books, which has become much more common. It is very commonplace for a manuscript originally written in English. When you're editing, you will have the phases are developmental editing, which is where you're changing things such as, narrative pace, maybe the scene, maybe motivations of characters, things on the level of the story. But usually for translation, and the way it works is the book has already been published in Arabic and I've translated it into English, and any changes which are brought up during the developmental editing stage, we do it in consultation with the author. That ends up making the English translation different to the original Arabic. So usually after developmental editing, as I'm sure you're fully aware, then you have line editing where they're looking at the use of language, and then you have proofreading. But the reason I'm explaining this is kind of like a pyramid, if you think from the bottom upwards, right, where the base is developmental editing, where the most sort of changes are happening. And as you progress in the editing process, it becomes less and less changes. But the reason I appreciate your question is a lot of translators just think when you translate a work and submit it, they'll come back and edit a few verbs, or maybe be like you've overused this adjective. Everybody has their darlings that you have to kill, but more and more it's developmental editing comes back where for example for the Djinn's apple, we added in an epilogue, we changed the ending, which I know, and we changed the ending, which a lot of people, when I mentioned this at a talk last week, one of the people was like, why would you do that? And the reason is because, and I won't tell you what the ending is now, since everybody has to read the book and find out, but the publisher found that the ending was not satisfactory. They wanted it to be they wanted some more closure. But the author, Djamila, said that she had left the ending open because she wants to write a sequel, right? But the publisher was very assertive in making clear that the ending needs to be different. And so what we did is Djamila then sort of rewrote an ending, which then we translated, and the editor edited that, and that was the ending. Now it's just a page and a half's worth of difference. It's not like a whole different denouement to the story, but it is a different ending.
How often does it happen in these translations?
I think, like I said, in the past 4 books I've done, Edo Souls, we didn't have any developmental editing, but in Black Phone we did. We had to flesh out some of the sexual tension in the book because, the editors at Amazon Crossing didn't think that was clear enough, and some of the characters' motivations. Because it is a book that is based in suspense, they wanted some of the scenes to be a bit tighter, not in terms of language, but in terms of the action. So they wanted to speed up some of the action there. So Black Phone, we had developmental editing. It's definitely much more commonplace, and I've heard from friends working from Korean also that it does happen. So it's not unheard of, but it does raise a lot of red flags in that I have worked with authors, on both ends of the spectrum. So one time I was working with an author and they said, just do whatever you need to do to make the book sell. Okay. And I said, at what cost? I was like, hold on here. This is your book. We're not doing this just to make books sell. And I've had also authors who have said, no, don't change anything. I'm not going to agree to any changes. The book is as it is. This is how I intended it to be. Leave it as it is. So with both, types of authors, I've had to sort of negotiate and cajole them because you have to keep in mind, unfortunately, literary translation, publishing, it's a business. Publishers need to make money. They have spent, a lot of money to get the book translated, to get it printed, distribution, etc. And if you want them to keep, coming back to translate more Arabic literature, it doesn't have to be to me, but I'm saying in general, the books need to sell.
I was reading David Bellow's book the other day. We interviewed him.
Yeah, I heard your episode with him. A Fish in My Ear. It's such a great book.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book. There was an entire chapter dedicated to translating humor. What has been your experience in translating humor? How challenging is that?
I think it's one of the most challenging things. And I think if someone says it's not challenging, it's perhaps because they're not doing it properly. That's my opinion. I think this actually, I translated a collection of short stories by the Libyan author Najwa bin Shatwan called Catalogue of a Private Life. Najwa as a person is highly sarcastic, very funny, a lot of sort of dark humor. She has had a very, tragic series of events in her life, but still makes light of them in her writing. When I was translating that short story collection, I was so at sea. I loved the book, but I realized not much of the humor is coming across. A lot of it is steeped in socio-cultural, sort of knowledge, which is embedded in a Libyan reader, but not for an English language reader, whichever country you're reading from, right? Even within the Arabic literary sphere, Libyan literature is at a distance. It is, it takes some sort of it takes some digging to understand it. What ended up happening is when I was translating that short story collection, I did a lot of research into how to translate humor, to the point then where I ended up teaching a course at the British Library on how to translate humor because I had done so much of it. My key advice, and the thing I can take away if I am to sort of distill it into one point for our listeners, is when you're translating humor, they say that you have sort of these two scripts running, like two sort of, currents, right? The first current is what's being, what the expectation is in the joke. When someone says like knock, knock, like what is the expectation? And then the second part, or the second sort of current or script, if you want to call it, is how that is subverted. And in the subversion, that is the humor. So when you're dissecting any joke, you have to make sure like you're setting up the expectation, which for different cultural audiences is different. And then how do you subvert that? So, or how is it subverted? So you need to kind of pull that apart in order to put it back together. So I love translating humor, and a lot of people think that Arabic literature is not funny, but it is funny. It's just not enough of it coming across. Everybody thinks it's tragedy and like, oppression and all of that, but that's because what editors are putting out there. I have had editors come to me saying like, oh, can you give me a story of a woman who is oppressed and then, gets, finds herself. And, I see you're just giggling away, and it's laughable, but people still want to play into those tropes and those, a lot of the times it's like, yes, I want money, but not at this like expense. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I want to translate a book, but I'm not going to help you find that kind of book because that's not, I think we can all agree that's a waste.
No, I was going through about your choice of books for translation on your website. What is the best part is that you have picked up novels to translate from writers in different countries: Kuwait, Jordan, Palestine, Lebanese, Syria, Oman, Yemen, Eritrea, Sudanese, Algerian. Is it a conscious choice?
Yeah, well, firstly, again, I'm very humbled. You've just spent all this time thinking of these questions, and I really appreciate it. It's very much a purposeful, deliberate choice. When I was starting literary translation, and also when I was studying Arabic, because I'm not a native speaker of Arabic, right? I'm not sure if we mentioned earlier, but I'm Pakistani, and I learned Arabic, when I was 17, so at much later stage in life. I lived in Pakistan for about 7 years, and then I was living in different countries around the world. But my mother's still in Karachi, so I go back every year. It very much is my home and where I'm from. So I was going to say that when I was studying Arabic and Arabic literature, we just had a series of Egyptian works, put on us. And so by the time I was done with my degree, I was really fed up with Egyptian literature. And I was just kind of, no offense to, Egyptian literature, but just really tired of it. And so there's at least 24 countries which recognize Arabic as their official language, and other countries where it's a secondary language. And where are those literatures, right? So for me, what I set out to do is to bring literatures into English from countries where even within the Arabic literary sphere, they're being marginalized, right? So Eritrea has a rich history of novels written in Arabic, but you wouldn't know about it because nobody really talks about it, right? Very similar with Yemen. There are so many, talented Yemeni authors, but they're just not making their way across into English. So that's one of the sort of criteria when I'm looking for a book, is something that, we haven't really heard from before in the Anglosphere or read a lot of, aside from it being like, something, a book which has an sort of an urgency to it, or an eternal quality to it, where it's a book that will last. As I've said, it doesn't mean that I won't make an exception to this rule. So, for example, the Lebanese book that I have done, a lot of Lebanese literature has been translated, but it was a YA novel. So for me, that is something more unusual, because we don't have a lot of Arabic literature being translated into English, which are middle grade novels, which means like for 10 to 12-year-olds, or YA, which is young adult for 12, I would say to 16, 17-year-olds. So everything I do, there's a reason, a rhyme, and a reason to it. Yeah.
Now we will come to violent phenomena.
Okay. The grand finale. Yeah, of violent phenomena.
So it was reading your article in Violent Phenomena. I think that was about 8-9 months ago.
What was your reaction?
It was almost surreal for me.
Really?
Yes.
Why?
No, it is so unbelievable. Those experiences, I just can't imagine such experiences a translator can go through. First, tell us about the book. I read the book through and through. The entire all articles I read, Anton Herz and everybody's, right? Tell us about the book, Violent Phenomena, and tell us about your particular experience.
So yeah, Violent Phenomena is a collection of essays on the act of translation, primarily by translators of color, and it was co-edited by Jeremy Tiang and Kavita Banot, and it's published by Tilted Access Press. And I've heard, which is really encouraging, that it's being used by a lot of universities in their sort of course texts to give a different view on translation to perhaps one which has been pre-established over the many years, basically by older white men, of what translation is and what does it mean to be a translator. And I'm not negating their experience. I'm just saying there is another experience. There's a different way of being a translator in this world. And so they actually did a sort of call out. They were just asking people for proposals, and I wasn't going to do it because I usually just translate. I used to write a lot when I was younger, and I stopped writing. But actually, my friend Anton Her is the one who, and my friend Claire Richards, who also translates from Korean, they both encouraged me to send in a proposal. And so I did. And then it was accepted. And then I was very surprised and proceeded to write this essay, which nearly ended my career. So it's an essay which is told in episodes of sort of absurd experiences I have had as a translator of color, working from Arabic into English with either publishers or editors. And the initial draft of that essay, I remember when my husband read it before I sent it in, he looked at me and he said, "Do you still want to translate? You're burning so many bridges here." He's like, "Someone can just go to your website and figure out what you're talking about." And I said, "Oh yeah, I don't think it's like," I was like, "I'm just kind of telling it how my experience was." And he's like, "Yeah, but at the same time, like it's a very small industry, and sure, this has been your experience, but don't let it sort of define your impression of a particular editor or a publishing house. Everybody's on a certain, he's much more full of grace than I am, and so after I'd sent that initial draft to them, I then retracted it. I wrote to the editors and said, "I don't feel comfortable with what I've sent in. I'm feeling quite anxious about it. Can I rewrite it?" And thankfully, Jeremy and Kavita were both very generous and said, "Yes, you can rewrite it." So I did rewrite it, and I took out, I think key identifiers, but left it a little bit so you can connect the dots if you are familiar with my work and my career. And I didn't write it in a way to tar anybody, with a brush, but it's more so just to make people aware, like, this is still happening, and I am, for example, in one of the episodes we talked, I've written about is being asked to be, anyways, yeah, maybe it just kind of goes to show. I mean, I just recommend people read it, but it's just, I don't know. I never really thought I would talk about any of those experiences. And after having written it, the response I've had from other translators working from even different language pairs has just been very encouraging in that they have appreciated me writing about it, whether because they weren't aware of it or because they themselves have experienced something similar. But at the same time, that's disheartening that it's, that it happens to more than one person. And yeah, so, I mean, the experiences just kind of range the gamut from being, stereotyped as a translator of color, so you can't translate a European language, to even if I'm someone who's mid-career, because I look younger, or are more energetic, that perhaps I am not as well informed or experienced in my craft. There's just this like a range of things. And what I would say is as time has gone on, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I have still had some unfortunate incidents with editors, but overall it seems to have improved.
Glad to know that.
So, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what that is a reflection of, but it just goes to show that I think the issue stems from, for me, is that the publishing industry is not diverse enough. I think, people are always talking about, majority of, like, the Authors Guild in the US released this report that shows that more than 80% of literary translators are white, right? And that's in the US, active literary translators. Now, in the UK, they have not conducted a similar survey. But for me, there's always such an emphasis on, we need to have more diverse literary translators, but we also need to have more diverse, bodies in the publishing sphere. And it's not diverse just in terms of ethnicity. I'm talking about like able bodies or neurodivergent or, different socioeconomic, sort of strata. I just think that you need more people with different experiences, because when editors acquire books, it's so arbitrary. It's their personal taste. And yes, the publishing house has an overall ethos and mission, but when it comes down to it, it's about what that specific editor likes. And if all the editors have very similar sort of interests, you're only publishing a certain kind of book. So I guess that's, yeah.
The funniest part was that cover page, desert cover.
Okay, I can tell that one. Yeah. So that was for a book I was working on, where it's a collection of short stories from Libya. I'm not giving the title because you can figure it out if you go to my page. But at the time, so we were talking about possible covers, and the editor just said, like, how about we just, let's just put a desert on the cover. This is in an email. And I received, you're just giggling away. People can't see you. It was so funny. I just received the email. I'm just sitting with it. And I read it again. And then I wrote back and I said, but there aren't any deserts in the book. Like, there's no mention of a desert, right? And so then there was silence. There was radio silence. And then I heard back from a different person in the house later on, after I was following up, like, what is happening with the cover, that, that was just like made in jest. It was just like a offhand comment, and to myself, I'm like, no, it wasn't. It was a serious suggestion, that because it's a piece of Arabic literature, obviously there are palm trees and camels and deserts in it. Which made me realize, because we had another issue, with the cover of that book, which I won't go into now, but as a translator, it makes you realize that you, in your contract, and this is something I do now, should have a clause that stipulates you as the translator have a say in the cover. A lot of the times I would assume the best, intentions of the publisher in that, I'm sure they're going to pick a cover that's very much, chiming with the essence of the book and the message of the book and, the feeling of the book. But a lot of the time, unfortunately, that's not the case. And you need to advocate for the author and the book. And so now I stipulate that, translators should be able to see the cover before it goes to print. It has happened before where, just told at the last minute, this is the cover and it's too late to change it. And I'm just like, what? And the author was also very upset in that instance. And then you should have a say in it. And also a lot of the times now I go on the sort of front foot and I give the details of a cover artist that I think would be good for the book. So I did that for Edo Souls. So for Edo Souls, which is a South Sudanese, sort of epic of motherhood during the time of civil war in Sudan, written by Stella Gaitano, which has come out with Daedalus books. I put them in touch with Yasmin Abdullah, who is a Sudanese artist who I had just come across on Instagram. And I was really taken with her work. And I thought that also her sort of, a lot of her works revolve around the idea of nationhood and like being fragmented from one's nation and womanhood as a prism, like sort of, through which we see that. And so that's definitely what Edo Souls is. And so I asked her if she would be open to doing cover art for the book and put her in contact with the publisher. And she read the book, which is also really helpful because, sometimes you have artists who can't read the book, which is fine. And you give them a sort of cover brief. But she came up with two fantastic options. And we chose one, which is now the cover of Edo Souls. And for me, that's so much better with me that we have, cover artists who are perhaps more familiar with the culture or somehow more connected to the book other than just like some random cover artist sitting in, no offense to like whatever, Silicon Valley or Minnesota or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? Someone who's very established and who is only contacted because they're experienced. And they may come up with a lovely cover, but I think it's much more impactful to have someone who can, I think, just advocate for the book through their art in a much more meaningful way.
In fact, I read the book.
You read Edo Souls? Oh my goodness! What did you think?
It's beautiful. See, there are certain things which are even common in India, in rural part of it. Especially to ward off the evil, they will give the names which are repelling, right? That is common in India too.
Interesting. Yeah, I hadn't realized that.
The rural part of it, right, where she lives in the childhood, right? There are a lot of information about the culture, right? Cultural nuances. How difficult was it for you to translate all that? Lot of terminology and lot of cultural, in terms of translation.
This is a great question. In terms of the actual, act of translation, it was very similar to other books I've worked on because a lot of the books that I do work on, I have to do an immense amount of research because each time it's like a different country, or time period, or culture, or part of that country. But what was difficult about it, but luckily I had the author on hand, Stella, was extremely, extremely generous with her time and explanations, is that sometimes a lot of that information was not available on the internet when I'm trying to understand how a dance actually looks. For one of the dances, I found a YouTube video of it, but other times, for one of the funeral rites, I couldn't find the garb, like what exactly are they wearing? So even though it's explained in the Arabic, someone I forget had mentioned to me or advised me that when you're translating, you really have to make sure that the visual, like the picture, comes across. And sometimes that requires you to add more to the English than what is originally there. And it's not a stealth gloss. It's not like over-explaining the culture. It's just making sure the picture itself is crisp.
It came out really well. That part of it, I thought it was very difficult to translate. It came out really well.
Thank you. Oh, I really appreciate it. Yeah. So I must really thank the author, Stella. She was my go-to sort of person in asking her to, explain a lot of sort of cultural, elements of the book. And as a result, the English translation is now being used as a reference for the German translator. So the German translator got in contact with me and was like, "Oh, can you please send me an advanced copy of the English because I want to refer to it."
Before we go on to the book that published today, what are you currently working on?
I'm currently working on a few things, but I guess the key thing that I would really like to share is I'm pitching some YA Palestinian fiction and middle grade Palestinian fiction. So I'm pitching. I can show you the book, but the listeners won't see it, but it's here. So we have this gorgeous cover. It's called Sitti al-Filistiniya. Why I'm focusing on Palestinian literature for young readers is that a lot of the, what I've noticed is a lot of families are shying away from talking about Palestine or don't know how to talk about Palestine, right? Whereas literature is a place where people can go to learn things, even if we want to, you don't want to over politicize it, whatever your stance is, but I guess what I want to say is it's really important to translate this literature for young readers to get them talking and thinking about, a world outside themselves. And so that's what I'm currently working on. And I've just finished also 2 excerpts for the Common magazine in the US, which is coming out in April. They have a spring edition of literature from the African continent written in Arabic. So countries such as Chad, Eritrea, South Sudan, and the like. But that's about it.
Now let's talk about the book came out today, Zinn's Apple.
Djinn's Apple is my second YA novel. So again, young adult fiction, which is written by Djamila Morani, who is an Algerian author. And it's a murder mystery set in the Abbasid era in Iraq. So Abbasid era is like 500 AD to about 700 AD in during the caliphate of Harun al-Rashid. And the main character, Nuruddin, is 12 years old. And this is no spoiler, but on the opening pages of the book, her father is murdered before her eyes. He's the court scribe and was in possession of a very important manuscript that the caliph wants. And the rest of the book is Nuruddin trying to figure out who killed her father, how to get revenge. She falls in love along the way and also, manages to pursue her dreams of being in the medical field. So far there's been really a wonderful response to it in that someone, one of the book bloggers today wrote about how the majority of her reading experience for YA has been primarily based in a world where the characters have been Western, contemporary, white. And so it was very interesting for her to read about a different time period told from a female point of view, with a murder mystery. It's very much a page turner. It's quite short. So if anybody is interested in getting into, Arabic literature and translation, or you just want a good book to read for if you have, children, but also why I think there was a statistic released that a lot of YA is actually predominantly read by adults. So, like the Harry Potter series was wildly popular, which is YA, but it was popular with adults. So even though it is a YA book, a lot of adults are enjoying it. I think it's because YA is quite escapist. It lets you, it's also a sort of safe world. It's not, there will be things that go wrong, but it's not as harmful as when you're reading an adult book, perhaps. But that's the book that's out today, and I'm really excited for it. It was a very long time in the making, a very long journey, and I'm exceptionally grateful to Neem Tree Press for taking the chance on that book. It's Jamila's first book translated into English. It's only also her second book ever written. And so she's very much a sort of debut author in that respect.
Is it a graphic novel or?
It's not a graphic novel. It's just it's about. I mean, I can show you a copy, but the listeners wouldn't be able to see it, but it's just over 100 pages. There's no pictures in the book. It's just words. And that's actually something that the editor, now that you mention it, is considering how to adapt it to be a graphic novel, because she thinks that it would do well as a graphic novel. Yeah. This is like unorthodox, but I have a question for you, Anil, which I hope you won't edit out, which is, why did you start this podcast and where do you want it to go from here?
Okay, I'll answer the second part first. We have a target of talking to translators in 56 languages. Now 44, 12 more to go. See, we have started this podcast speaking to writers in Telugu literature, my mother tongue. We have done 50 of them, and we continue to do that. Talk about books basically. This podcast is about books. Then we moved on to translations. So all those episodes which we have done in Telugu, of course they are in Telugu language, a lot of episodes. And for the last 1 year or so we moved on to translations, right? We continue to do Telugu podcast episodes as and when some interesting book comes up. And other than that, it will be a translation focused podcast from now on. We have been talking to translators in different languages now. Once this 56 gets over, probably we will go back to the same translator and bother them as and when the new book comes, an interesting new book comes. So basically the short answer is it will be translation focused.
Oh, fantastic.
Thank you, Sawad, for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Take care. Bye.